Welcome to Torah from Boca, where ancient wisdom meets modern life from sunny South Florida, specifically from Boca Raton. For 15 years, I've had the privilege of sharing Torah with my community, both in the synagogue and throughout South Florida, and now I want to bring Torah from Boca to you. Let's explore the beauty, spirituality, and depth of Torah from Boca together. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So 3 weeks can feel like a short amount of time, but a lot can happen in 3 weeks. What do you think about the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, which we begin tonight? That's when ancient Jerusalem went from one of the wonderful cities of the world, one of the ancient wonders of the world, to almost completely destroyed. I left Sharei Kodesh the day before the 17th of Tammuz, and now I return. So it's almost been 3 weeks. And when I was gone, I was at Camp Ramah. I didn't really look at my phone that much, nor did I check the news. And when I get back, here's what I learned I missed. The Epstein files were on the top of the nation's mind. Sydney Sweeney wore jeans, and some people liked it, and a lot of people really didn't like it. Still, everyone thought twice about getting on a kiss cam at a concert. And then a nation argued about why we're so obsessed with this couple. They discussed how it showed a cultural shift in our country, the breakdown of morality, the collapse of the family. And they also noted that we need to grow up, and sometimes a meme is just a meme. But the next big story was Gaza, and particularly the humanitarian crisis that has led many to say that Gaza and the Gazans, the civilians, are on the cusp of starvation. Now, both stories have something in common, or all these stories. Everyone has a strong opinion about it, and there has been plenty of reprimand given openly on social media. And now, speaking about the Jews in particular, I've seen individual Jews make comments. I've seen leaders of organizations representing thousands make comments. And I opened my email, which I hadn't checked, to letters asking me to sign on to tell the Israeli government to end the genocide in Gaza as a rabbi and a Jew. Then another letter asking American Jewish leaders and institutions who have been, they said, silent through the war to speak out against the dark path the Netanyahu government is taking us down, to stand for our values with courage, and say that the horrors unfolding in Gaza cannot be justified, and to demand that the Israeli government end this war, bring the hostages home now. There was an interesting line. It said, let history show, the letter said, that we didn't stay silent. When our values were tested, we stood firm for them. And of course, the tagline, which would make anyone shake in their boots if they didn't sign it, silence is complicity. It is time for a reckoning. Now, frankly, in the age of social media, when everyone has a platform, I don't think that silence is really the issue. Right? And then I got articles from rabbis who said the opposite. A friend and colleague, someone who I like, I may disagree at times with Rabbi Stuart Weintraub, and he wrote, at a time when Jews and the Jewish state are under attack from so many directions, one would hope that we could at least expect support from our rabbis. But instead, many engage in virtue signaling, or in what in football terms is referred to as piling on. In other words, even if the worst was true, a Jew never publicly says anything bad against the Jewish state. Now, there are two values at play here, taking a step back. One of them is, if I am only for myself, What am I? This is that universal point of view. But the other one is a particularistic point of view. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And both the urgency is now. Now. But there are other values that are at play here. And one of those values has to do with this situation. The war in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis, even the kiss cam story. The idea over the last 3 weeks that I've thought about is this idea of tochecha, or reprimand. Tochecha, the Hebrew word, has many different translations. It can be a harsh critique. It could be constructive criticism. But even when coupled with nice things, criticism is not an easy pill to swallow. This week's parsha, the last book of the Torah, opens with these words: Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael be'ever hayarden b'midbar ba'rava mol suf Bad Param, Uben Tofel, Velavan, Vechatzerod, Vedi Zahav. He said, these are the words that Moses addressed to all the people of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. Through the wilderness in the Arava, near Suf, between Paran and Tofel, Lavan, Chatzroth, and Di Zahav. Now the commentators ask, this is the last book and this is how we're beginning? Why do we bring up these seemingly random places that Bnei Israel traveled to on their journeys? Now Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says, these are words of reprimand, reproof that God is enumerating here for the people. And Moses, through Moses. Here all the places are where the people provoke God to anger. But he doesn't mention the sins themselves. Why? Rashi says, to protect them. It's kind of like your father not mentioning the $3,000 hotel bill for damages, but reminding you that it happened in Las Vegas. That never happened. I'm just giving an example. Furthermore, he spoke the words to all of Israel, and he invited them, the Midrash says, to speak up if they disagree with him. If it's not true, tell me. No one denied it. And it reminds us of another commandment. In Leviticus 19:17 we read, you shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin. Tocheach, tocheach et amitecha. Reprove your kin. Reprimand your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. This is the commandment. The question is, why are we given this commandment? And here are all the other questions. What does it mean to be commanded not to hate your brother in your heart? How does that work? We have an obligation to reprimand our relatives so that we don't incur guilt because of their sins. But what does this mean on a surface level, on a deeper level? How do we reprimand them? Do we do it in public or do we do it in private? In the age of social media instant communication, with various settings from public to private, what can I say and what can I not say? How do we offer criticism to the ones we love? And how can we be critical of Israel while also loving her at the same time? Now Rashi offers some advice. Regarding rebuking others, he says, never do it in public. He quotes a Talmudic passage that when one embarrasses someone in public, their face turns white. They said that was like them dying, a slow death. If you rebuke someone in public and you cause them embarrassment, you now bear a serious sin. So it's clear it must be done respectfully, must be done privately, but how often do I do it? What if they keep on doing it? How often do I need to say, I want the war to end? In the Talmud of Bava Metzia, they look at the doubling of the language, to teach us that it's not just a one-time thing. If we truly care for someone, we don't give up after one or two conversations. The Talmud imagines a student saying, maybe we only have to speak up once or twice. But Rava, very well-known rabbi, says, no, if it takes 100 times, we still have the responsibility to try. And it's not just about hierarchy. The verse doesn't say a teacher must rebuke a student or the wise must correct the simple. It teaches everyone must speak up when something is wrong, even if it means a student calling out to a teacher. Tochecha, rebuke, when done with love and integrity, is an act of spiritual responsibility. Not just toward the other person, but toward the community and toward our own souls. And we also have a teaching in the Talmud that warns us against reprimanding our fellow when we know that advice will not be heeded. In Yevamot 65b, Rabbi Ilya taught us, just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that what will be heeded, so it is for a mitzvah for a person not to say which will not be heeded. In other words, you can't rebuke when someone will be unreceptive to that message. Now, what is clear to me, though, is that reprimand cannot be separated from not hating your fellow Jew. And we're reminded of this especially on the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. Why was the second temple destroyed? The Talmud says because of sinat chinam, hatred unbound between Jews. We're living in confusing times. Truth, what we would consider truth, what actually happened, is harder to come by now more than ever. We don't know which news organizations to believe anymore because so many have shown their biases against Israel. Is it negligence? Is it a conscious plan? We don't know. We don't know who to trust. At the end of this week's Parsha, we're reminded, though, of who we are. The tribes of Reuben and Gad are mentioned at the end of Devarim. These two tribes had their land on the other side of the Jordan. And I kind of can't help but think about ourselves, Jewish America, in that way. We're like those tribes. We're part of a nation, but we're separated by a barrier. Now, they didn't have to fight along with the rest of the tribes to conquer the land, but they did. So what do I think? Is Israel committing a genocide this time? That finally now the Gazans going to die en masse from starvation? Now, I don't believe that evidence shows starvation, but Gazans are suffering from extreme hunger, and it's still a humanitarian crisis without it being starvation. Hamas started the crisis and should take responsibility for it completely, and at the same time, Israel has a responsibility to the civilians of Gaza. Israel has already taken unprecedented measures never seen in the history of warfare to feed one's own enemies and their civilian populations because Hamas uses their civilians as a tool of war. Their suffering only helps them. It's part of their strategy. A brilliant suggestion I heard from a leader in the hostage movement when I was in Israel. He said, instead of giving out flour, Israel should be throwing bread out into the streets from the skies to Gaza to flood the streets with perishable foods so that Hamas cannot store the foods and use them also as weapons. I'm also convinced by security experts and journalists who say that Israel's strategy of pressuring Hamas through withholding food over the last 6 months has not worked. But you didn't come here for my expertise in geopolitics. I believe that my unique voice is best served here to give you a different message. The message of this sermon, these words are, before we give our thoughts, before we reprimand, we should take time loving also. Especially before we stand up for what we believe in is the most important thing in the world right now. And it's perhaps the greatest lesson my mother taught me. As my father mentioned, her yahrzeit is tonight, Tisha B'Av. In her last words to us, she wrote, as you know, your grandparents came from Poland. They worked very hard to give us a better life, and so has your father and me. What I want to depart for you is to be true to yourself, to remember your upbringing, to be happy with your lot. Her parents survived, my grandparents survived 4 years in the Auschwitz concentration camp. They lost everything. Almost their entire family, save 2 cousins between the 2 of them. She never wanted us to forget that. But also to be happy with our lot. The legacy of being a Jew, no matter how difficult it can be at times. And that is my legacy. It's our legacy. As a Jew, I have no other choice but to love the Jewish people no matter who they are, because in the end, when we were marked for slaughter, it didn't matter what type of Jew you were. It didn't matter whether you were Zionist or anti-Zionist or conservative or reform. Ultra-Orthodox, didn't matter. And I carry that burden, that destruction can come for our people. That it could have happened on October 7th, and despite Israel's military victories, it could happen again. But I also hold the obligation to offer tochecha, rebuke, in the right way. Sometimes we cannot remain silent, as we learn in our tradition. Sometimes we must speak up. So what now? In a world filled with noises and memes and outrage and endless commentary, how do we fulfill the mitzvah of tochecha without becoming part of the problem? How do we criticize with love, caution, and courage? The answer may be found in what Moses does at the beginning of Devarim. Not shouting over others, but speaking with care, in code, to a people he loves more than life itself. His words were not only rebuke, they were also part of a final blessing. And like Moses, if we want our words to matter, we must begin from a place of relationship, of memory, and of deep responsibility. Tonight and tomorrow, as we mark the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, we remember the dangers of sinat chinam, hatred gone wild. But we also remember that our survival is always dependent not on our perfection, but on our capacity to hold each other close, even when we disagree. And if we must offer critique, let it be from within, not as enemies of each other, but as a family with a shared fate. May we be the kind of people who speak truth, yes, but only after listening deeply, who love fiercely even when it hurts, who carry the memory of our people's pain with enough humility to approach rebuke, not with rage, but with reverence. And may we merit this Shabbat and this Tisha B'Av to rebuild what was broken, not just with critique, but with care, not just with words, but with presence, and not just with passion, but with love. Thanks for listening to this week's Torah from Boca. If you want to learn more about me, you can visit my website at rabbidavidbaum.com or check out our website and our congregation, sharekodesh.org, Congregation Sharei Kodesh. Thank you to AZ Studio from Pixabay for the music, and we hope to see you next week at Torah from Boca.